All right, so it's 6:01 p.m. It's the Monday,
Oh,
March 15th. Declare this meeting of the Board of Selectmen open. I think the intent tonight was to meet jointly with the Bylaw Subcommittee at Peter's request.
and now that I'm going to wait. Norm, you can hear us? And you're muted. Ron, can you hear us too?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Sorry, other Ron Kent.
Oh, good.
Well, there being 4 members of the ad hoc bylaw committee present, they being Ron Kent, Norm Anderson, Anita Carlson, and myself, Peter Crane, I declare the March 15, 2021 meeting of the ad hoc bylaw committee open.
I gotta unload the car of all this. Yeah,
so we are here tonight to discuss the first couple chapters of proposed bylaw changes. And here comes our 5th member. Also present at 6:02 is Lynn Turcott. So to introduce everyone, I know it's been a while since the select board dealt with the bylaw committee. So as you can see, our town clerk, I'm pointing at the screen, which I know helps everyone online. Anita Carlson, our town clerk, 3 other at-large members, Lynn Turcott, who's an attorney, and Ron Kent, who is a surveyor, and Norm Anderson, you all know, and me, you're all just too familiar with also. We are the 5 of the 7 members. There are 2 open slots in our committee, and if we find more people to appoint to finish this up, we'll be happy to pass them along to you for appointment. So with all that, I don't intend to run through the substantive bylaw changes document. I figure we'll just go through them all fairly well one at a time. And we'll run through them fairly well in sequence. So let me bring up the first, if I can get to my, oh, guess we forgot to start recording again. There it goes. Now we'll share that. So now hopefully you can see the general provisions bylaw.
Yep.
Yes, good, okay. So before we get too far into this, I do want to ask about how you folks want to see it. I sent around just the new text. I didn't send around any of the changes because, in fact, most of these bylaws have been so substantially changed that you see a whole lot of red and some strike through on everything that's been deleted. And most of the bylaws are going to be in this kind of shape where they have been. There have been some significant changes throughout. To whip through very quickly, there are always, Section 1 is a purpose. Section 2 is always authority, and authority in this case is the enabling statute. What gives the town the right to write this bylaw and to enact the bylaw? Section 3 is definitions when there are some, but is frequently omitted. So as we go through this, anything that's red and underlined is brand new text. Anything that's strike through is deleted, as you can see in this section that was completely removed. And we'll just kind of go through. I'm going to really hit what I think are the high points. I'm happy to stop at any point for any questions you have. So we have a nice general definition of committee throughout the bylaws. We had too many places where they were board, committee, council, commission, whatever. We just reduced them all to committee. And we have obviously definition of a calendar day for day, a couple of other. This one, town official, turns out to be surprisingly important, as you will see that phrase throughout a lot. So it's any town officer, employee, or member of a committee, whether elected or appointed. So anybody who can act on behalf of the town is a town official, which is different from an officer who's usually been not always elected into a specific office. Like Anita, as town clerk, is a town officer, and Ron is a town officer. going through this quickly. This section 4 has not changed significantly, as you can see. There are a few strike throughs, a little bit of rewording change. So the Attorney General considers every wording change to be a significant change, or a substantive change is the word they would use. So I don't mind calling those changes insignificant, even though legally they are substantive and need to be voted by town meeting. So section 4, which is all about how we can change bylaws, nothing significant changed there. Where we get into things that really changed, it's section 5. And this changed, the biggest change is that we rolled pretty much the entire non-criminal disposition, the text of the bylaw proper, really into this section. So what we say is that that town can enforce any bylaw, regulation, or rule through a criminal complaint or non-criminal disposition or by civil complaint. These are all the ways the town can enforce its rules, regulations, and bylaws. We specifically say every day or instance of a violation constitutes a separate offense. So if it keeps going, the town could theoretically collect lots more money. All fines have been moved to the schedule of fines, which we'll go over in a little while. And the other thing is that the bylaw used to say can be punished by up to a fine of $300 or a fine of up to $300, which it turns out is not a legal way to express it. You have to come up with a definitive fine. Yes, Mitch.
Okay, so when we're talking about a breach, for example, of a bylaw, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each day or instance that a violation exists or occurs shall constitute a separate offense. Who makes that determination?
One would imagine the enforcement officer, which is defined in the table, in the schedule of fines. So it could be a police officer, it could be the DPW commissioner, it could be the building inspector. Both of those names are in the schedule of fines many times.
Okay, I'm just trying to, I'm seeing how enforcement, my only concern would be, I want to make sure enforcement is uniform and not subject to loose interpretation on different things, if that makes sense.
It does. I don't think we have a way to say, to mandate a particular enforcement approach.
Right. So this language, though, Peter, just to ease my curious mind,
Mm-hmm.
Because I know how you work, I'm assuming that a lot of this is based off of best practice. Other communities have used this language. You've probably pulled this consulting with other documents. Is that?
Oh,
fair?
that's absolutely true. And this was primarily a rewording of the section that's already there.
Right. Okay.
I mean, we changed indictment to complaint. That's okay. And civil complaint. We tried to harmonize the language a little bit.
Got it.
But it's the same methods that have always been there.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep my hands up as well.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry, I did not see that. Ron, yes.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes when you're doing Zoom, you can't see the different hands. That's why I commented. So through you, Mr. Chair, to kind of follow up on Mitch, and I got another question as well.
Mhm.
Each day and instant, I'm just going to use an example and help me out here. So let's assume, and I don't even know if the town has one, a bylaw where a citizen has to clean out their sidewalks from snow.
Mhm.
The first day, the enforcement officer comes out, writes them a warning ticket or a ticket. They don't do it. Second day, now he actually execute a fine, writes out a fine.
Mhm.
The third day, they still didn't do it. So that fine is an automatic every day until they fix the violation, or does the the enforcement officer, can they use their discretion for how they institute the fines?
I guess that was a better way of putting my question, Ron. I'm sorry.
So what I would say is there is an element of discretion.
Okay.
If we, that's actually a very good example, Ron. Another one would be someone who's dumping something into the sewer system, into the separate stormwater system instead of the sewer system. Each one of those instances would be a finable offense. Or trying to think of other things.
Peter, the issue though, that to follow that, the issue is there's nothing in here that I read that gives the enforcement officer any leeway. That's why I'm wondering if does that specifically have to be spelled out that the enforcement officer can determine.
Here's all the leeway you need. The word may. Any town bylaw, regulation, or rule may be enforced through any lawful means in law or in equity, including but not limited to.
That answers my question. The word to may is in. And then just to follow up on that,
Yes.
well, I can either ask a question now or let you go to C, to D. Do you want to finish and get the D and then I'll ask you another question?
Sure. I'm not sure much.
So the language though, Peter, like
Yes.
B, C, and D, there are no underlines or crossouts. Are those, is that all new?
That's all brand new text, yes.
Okay, and so, look, is this going to make it easier for us to enforce what we have on the books in terms of the bylaws? Because we have a lot of things, I think, and I think Norm could probably speak to this too. We have a lot of things that aren't necessarily, or that haven't been widely enforced in town, and does this help us in that way?
I don't think so. I think someone who's motivated to enforce the laws will do so. I think someone who is not motivated, it will be more difficult to get that person to do so. That's been my experience.
Well, yeah, that's life's challenge, I suppose.
Right. So I don't think that these bylaw changes impact the ease with which any enforcement action can be enacted or pursued.
Okay, understood. All right, thank you.
Sure. So Ron, you had a question about D?
Yeah, the question I have is it's a minimum $100 violation.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if there are some things, for instance, snow on a sidewalk, if they didn't do it one day and it wasn't specific in terms of the schedule, is $100 too steep? Because that seems to be the minimum, is what you're doing. So if it's another way, if it's not otherwise in the schedule of fines, it seems it's a minimum $100 no matter what the penalty is. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is exactly correct.
Is that comparable in other towns, or how do you, is that $100, is that kind of?
$100 is what we just talked around and came up with. We thought $25 or $50 was too little, but this is the town's bylaw. So if we want to make it $50, that's not a problem. I'm literally typing words.
Okay. So the issue of may allows the zoning officer discretion as to charging the 100 or not, but it doesn't allow him or her any discretion to go underneath 100.
That is correct, and that's a requirement of the AG's office.
Okay. All right, I'm okay with it. I just was wondering, I can't think of all the different violations, but $100 for a minor violation might seem a little steep, but again, if it's minor, the enforcement officer could just say, all right, we're not going to fine you this
That's
time.
right. A one-time warning will usually take care of it.
And Worcester, just as you know, for everybody's information, it's $75 per day for, like, example, the snow shoveling. So I don't think the 100's out of line with what surrounding communities target.
Okay. I'm good. I just wanted to make sure I understood how that worked.
Right. Okay. Anything else through D? So E is really, what surprises me is that I know why. This is copied in from what used to be the criminal disposition bylaw. A police officer can enforce anything is all this says. So that's really the combination of what was already in general provisions, along with the reduction of what was in the non-criminal disposition bylaw. Moving on. Now, I should also say, and I should have said a little bit earlier, this bylaw has already been through legal review because it was done a long time ago now.
Legal's happy with it?
Legal's happy with it.
All right,
So,
great.
and in fact, there's a section that isn't there anymore that we'll talk about when we get there, and but we'll just advance through this. Now, the reason I talk about legal review specifically is because of the changes to this section right here that I don't think we had not proposed any changes to the section, but the attorneys did. And they added words like, so purposes of these bylaws and otherwise, which I believe means that the office of the Board of Selectmen would no longer exist. It would only be the office of the Select Board.
Same thing.
No, it has non-gendered language.
I mean, it's the same principle thing. I agree.
It's
Right.
the same principle. It is a gender-neutral approach, and we have to be careful. We have to define it this way because the Board of Selectmen is defined in Mass General Law. So we need something like this to say Board of Selectmen equals Select Board, so that we never need to reference the Board of Selectmen again, other than this one place. And then moving on, treasurer collector is exactly the same thing. Instead of having the office of treasurer - town collector, which is what the special legislation created for the town of Rutland quite a long time ago, Becky prefers treasurer collector, so we just called it that.
Pretty much called it.
Yeah. So the section that isn't here anymore is the section about general rules for committees. We pulled that out of here and put it into the bylaw that talks about you have to be a member, you have to be a registered voter. So we will hit that section later. I know it was in the edition that you had. That had not gone through legal review, but now we're back to a fully reviewed bylaw. And finally, severability. I consider this important, and it's broad reaching, but it affects all bylaws, all regulations, and all rules made by the town, any committee, any body of the town. If they get taken to court over any element, it doesn't impact any other segment of that bylaw, regulation, rule. So we've had these sprinkled throughout bylaws, and I'm just rolling it up into a single one, and I made it big enough to also cover regulations and rules. And that is the end of the first bylaw. That was pretty fast, wasn't it?
All right, let's hope for a quick second.
For the second one, I'm actually going to bring up, if I can find it. There it is. This is our fine schedule, which looks a lot like it used to before. We've added a little information to it. Everything references chapter, article, and section, and also gives a description so that everyone knows what it is, and therefore what the fine is. Here, I have to move your pictures out of the way here. And there are, some of these are written warning for the first. These are values are taken from the current fine table. I have not gone to each of the, I don't think I've gone to everybody who's in here because we haven't come close to town meeting to when we would want to change it.
Question
So
for
these
you.
are
What's that?
that's the fine schedule.
Yes.
Like you go, just as an example, you go back up to scenic byways. If you go down a little bit.
Oh, the scenic roads?
Yeah, scenic roads, failure to obtain permission to make changes affecting stone trees.
Sorry about that. Yep.
That is the fine schedule. But is there, I mean, this document doesn't indicate the ability of remedy. This is just a fine schedule.
Correct.
Okay.
So to do more than just fines would require that if anything that we would want to enforce in that way, and I would imagine scenic roads is one of those things, they would have to put the stone wall back, for example.
Yep.
They can't, if they cut down a town tree, all they can do is plant a new one. So there is, but in any event, there would need to be something in the original bylaw about that, with that requirement. So if we were to go to the scenic roads bylaw, we would see whether or not it says that the town has the authority to make them restore to the best of their ability. And I believe there is something like that.
But that stuff's not going anywhere. We're obviously not talking about that yet, but that's going to remain unchanged. All that stuff.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Just a question through you, Mr. Chairman. I see the DPW superintendent is kind of a heavy enforcer here. And go back up to the top, go back up to the first and second one, which is the road things. Yeah, town highways. There you go. Interfering with snow removal trucks. In other towns, it's always been a police officer here. Is it currently the DPW superintendent, or is this something new?
It's always been the DPW superintendent,
Okay.
but it's also always been enforceable by a police officer.
Okay.
See, that's the thing, is that particular bylaw probably runs through like DPW stuff, I would imagine.
Right.
And so like, for example, in Worcester, that bylaw is it would be a DPW focused discussion, but you would utilize the police department to enforce the actual violation.
That's normally what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, your primary enforcement officers, I think is what Peter is saying, based on how the bylaws are structured, even though the police officer, if you remember from the first bylaw, can be an enforcement officer of any of these, your primary is still going to be, or what Peter, you kept as the primary is still where the original bylaw is housed.
Yes.
Basically.
Correct.
Got it.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome. This fine table has also been through legal review, and there are a couple issues in here that that have to do with some of the Board of Health fines that need to actually be cleaned up, because some of these are we haven't fixed them yet. We've started to talk with the Board of Health. Some of these have to actually can only be fined based on a regulation that's promulgated under a specific section of MGL. I don't remember which ones off the top of my head. So some of these will either need to be changed, or someone's going to have to write regulations, or it'll have to go away.
Seems to me they need to stay, so someone's going to have to write regulations because they need to stay.
I would think so. I don't see anything that we'd want to make optional. And then the building inspector has, oh my goodness, quite a number of these. And that's the end of the table. Questions about the fine structures? I'm not going to bring up the non-criminal disposition bylaw because it's completely repealed. So I will instead get to, if I could read this, town meetings. And here we start talking about subtle but substantive changes to the bylaws. Along with it looks, things look, well, we have changed a great many words and we have changed the structure of things. And so there are a lot of changes that are sort of natural here. But if I were to just try and reduce it to, here's what's important. Our proposal is to change town meeting from the Saturday preceding the second Monday in May to the Saturday following the second Monday in May. We tried to do that once before along with some other changes, and it didn't pass town meeting because of the other changes, like moving it to some night of the, I think it was a Monday night. But town clerk has a lot of work to do around town meeting and around the town election. So the town election is now and remains the second Monday in May. And the town meeting is the following would be the following Saturday if this passes.
Which, through you, Peter, which
Yes.
I think would actually benefit the select board and the town administrator's office, because it gives another whole week once we call the warrant is posted, gives from the election day that whole work week until the town meeting. And historically, Rutland's town meeting was always held on the Saturday following the election, and it got changed it was like 2014 or 15, and it was actually by a citizen's petition, and that was before we had a town administrator also. So the thinking at the time, the people that proposed the changes, who actually aren't in town anymore, but their argument was that it might be difficult for a member of the select board if they were elected on the Monday, then it's harder for them to argue the budget or propose the budget for the following Saturday. But actually, it's the FinCom does that part of it, and and we have a town administrator now to answer questions. So I think some of that's irrelevant. And the other thing is that out of the majority of years, the day in between is Mother's Day, and people always bring that up at meetings, at the town meeting. I think so that if we got it away so it wasn't the evening before Mother's Day, I think residents would like that also.
Okay.
It's Leah. I have a question, if I may, Mitch.
Please.
I was just curious. I know oftentimes if there's any sort of override or anything, there's an article for town meeting, and then that's pending a successful ballot vote at the election. Does that change anything if we just swap the schedule of events?
Generally, no. What it would mean is that if something was dependent on a ballot question and that ballot question failed, town meeting would vote to take no action. I mean, the warrant is the warrant, the ballot, the election ballot is the election ballot. They always, they interact somewhat on complex questions like that. But all it means is that instead of you would know what the result was before town meeting, instead of waiting an extra week-ish to find out the answer. Now it is, I do have to say, Leah, there are some laws that require it be a town meeting vote and then a ballot question. I will use the Community Preservation Act as something that specifically states it has to go in that order. But they also say that the town meeting has to be 90 days before the election. So in either event, we're in kind of funny space. Right? So I think the sequence is not important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Where did you go? Notice is the same as it was. We explicitly allow posting to the website. Here comes another substantive change. quorum is proposed to be changed from 10 to 30. We've talked about this a number of times. There have been enough times where 30, where there are virtually always 30 voters. And in fact, that was, Anita, that was true at the last special, right?
Right.
With all the COVID stuff in Glenwood.
Correct.
It's kind of, there is something attractive about being able to say that you can meet the quorum with people at the head tables, but I'm not sure that represents the town.
No, that's not good. That's a good point, Peter. So I like that. I like the change.
Okay, good. I like to hear positive reinforcement. Awesome. We are explicitly calling out town meeting time as the rules, so no one ever brings up Robert's Rules of Order on the floor again.
Well, I mean, they still will, but it's, you know, I guess.
True enough. Yes, they will. So much of this is the same, that yes, you have to do things in the same. Now, by the way, having specifically stated town meeting time, we have tailored parts of this bylaw to the rules specified in town meeting time. They generally aligned, but there were some specific things we changed here. Articles and what had to be in writing, we actually did a fair amount of work on. For what must be in writing, so we don't say necessarily that every motion on the floor has to be in writing, but everything to amend must be in writing, which is a very good idea for us for traceability. And any motion having to do with the expenditure of money. We left nomination for committees. That's actually from town meeting times, even though committees generally aren't formed any longer in the, at town meeting, but in case they ever are again. Okay, we made the limit of debate 5 minutes instead of 10. And we also added these two magic words, in total. So for the people, and we all can think of one or two, who love to get up and pontificate repeatedly about an issue, they've got 5 minutes total unless it's extended by vote of the meeting. And the moderator has to appoint a timekeeper to keep track of time. We also explicitly have a statement to allow other guests to be recognized by the moderator. So this is how our department heads get recognized who aren't residents of the town or voters.
So what do we, in the instance of, for example, the growth bylaw that went through where you had several members of the public give presentations. Are those going to be limited to 5 minutes?
Yes, they are.
And Randy is the moderator, or whoever the moderator ends up being. I'm going to assume it's Randy. He has no discretion over whether or not to extend that. That's going to be hard and firm.
That was the intent, and that it's not that people can't go longer, it's that the town, the body has to agree that it's okay to go longer.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's going to take 5 minutes to vote on whether or not somebody can speak for more than 5 minutes.
Not with the clickers.
Okay, I just, you know, I could see how that could become.
And in fact, it doesn't have to be a formal vote. It can be a voice vote. One of those without objection and be allowed.
Yeah, I think, my opinion, I like the intent of it. We, as a body, as in government in general, don't always do as an effective job as we should in communicating issues and policy issues to the general public. And I think that goes both ways. I think sometimes the general public is busy and there are certain things they don't learn about until town meeting. I just don't want to limit debate if it's going to better inform the people that are there. That would be my only 2 cents. But if anyone has strong opinions on it, it's fine. I mean, I guess my opinion isn't that strong because you can always plea to the general body to extend your conversation time, and if they like you, they'll give you the thumbs up, and if they don't like you, they'll give you the old Roman thumbs down, and you can go back to your seat.
And I mean, as a reality check, we know that nobody more than 15 minutes into a conversation about any topic is, I shouldn't say nobody. I would expect the body to not allow extensions the longer that a discussion goes on an article.
That's been kind of the tenor.
Right.
All right.
So maybe there's something we can do to this that instead of saying by vote of the body, it's we'll just say like on C, with consent of the body.
Well, in looking at it again, I mean, this is, if you're going to put a time limit, this is the most democratic way to do it. If you leave it up to any one individual, then you leave the room for error. This way, it's I guess the most democratic. So, yeah.
Okay. We added provisions explicitly for a secret ballot. There have been a few times this has come up.
Great.
Committee reports has been there for a long time. It stays with some minor changes. Completion of business, no, we don't. You're not allowed to dissolve the meeting until everything's been addressed, although it may be extended to another session. All of that's fairly well the same. And I think that's it. Any other questions about town meeting? All right. Let me. Now let's talk about the changes that directly impact your body. I've already done that. Let's pull up our friend, the select board. So many changes here. A fair number of them substantive, a fair number of them inconsequential. So the first thing we did is we declare you by bylaw to be a 5-member committee, a board, elected for 3-year terms. There's only one word we have to add here, which is staggered. Elected for staggered 3-year terms. Which is what B really says. Whoa, why'd you go away? Oh, come on back. Wow. I don't think I've managed to do that before to it. I'll bring it back up. Oh, Word is very unhappy. Wow, all right, let me reopen it and see what happens this time. Nope, it's very blank. I'm gonna have to completely kill. Make sure I clean all up. All right. We all love Microsoft tools, don't we? All right, you're back. And now I can't find my cursor. There. All right, select board powers. So as I said, 5 members elected 3-year terms, and the second part just really says make sure they're staggered. So this bylaw is a combination of all the select board references in all the bylaws that we have today. So a great deal has been pulled into here. We believe, the bylaw committee believes, that it's best to have all the duties for an office or a committee in one place rather than spread throughout the body of bylaws. And you'll see things where I'll point out some cases where things came in or went out specifically. So the primary responsibility as chief executive officer, that phrase actually came from town council on a previous review of other changes that didn't make it into town meeting. We get rid of some of this. So this is where we have to, you could see you, the select board, are agents of the town to institute, prosecute, and defend any and all claims, actions, and proceedings to which the town is a party, or the interests of the town are or may be involved. So it's all the legal stuff for deciding to institute a lawsuit or to defend a lawsuit. It's all on you folks, with the single exception of treasurer collector and doing land title taking and prosecuting those.
The section 4B2.
Yes.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Okay. So this is in fact the single open question in this bylaw. If the current bylaw has a limit, oh gosh, I have to look up the limit. I apologize. I now suddenly don't remember. Anita, do you remember what the limit is?
What's the question?
What's the limit that the select board can currently settle?
Monetary. Wanted to say 10,000, but that doesn't sound right.
No. It's much less than that. It's in the hundreds of dollars range. And it might even be currently $300. I just wanted to check before I.
Oh, that's where I was going. But
that's under legal affairs, I believe. Yes.
That's right, 3.
So that is the current limit. So
Is that for legal, like litigious acts?
Yes. So if someone sues the town and you, the select board, agree to settle, and the amount of the settlement is under $300, then you get to do that without town meeting involvement. Now, I believe this is limited to settlement that comes from town funds and not from an insurance payout.
Okay, that would make perfect sense, because I would freak out if you can get further with that. So
right. So if there were a settlement where insurance was not involved and it cost more than $300 to settle it, you have to go before town meeting.
okay, that's fine. All right. Thank you for clarifying.
So
If I could, just to follow up on, because I was worried about the same thing. There's a lot of insurance settlements for significant money. If that's not counted, that's great. But what if there's a deductible on the insurance plan? And I'm a little bit concerned that that's.
Ooh, Ron, that's a good catch.
Yeah, I don't want to get killed by the deductible here. So I'd love to get that amount up to. Frankly, I think it should be up closer to $1,000 to take care of any potential deductible.
and I'm fine with that. This is why we had the open question. $300 never sounded reasonable in the best of, well, in these days. So if you think it's 1,000, we'll make it 1,000.
I think that would cover most deductibles at $1,000. Often the deductibles are 500, but there are cases where it can be as high as 1,000. It also allows you, by having that deductible, to get a little bit lower insurance rates. So it allows you to negotiate a little bit better insurance deal if the deductible is a little bit higher. I think $1,000 would be more reasonable in that number.
Okay. Great, we have an
I
answer to
agree.
our question. Thank you
I
very much.
agree with that.
Okay, great. Leah, do you have anything to say, pro or con here?
I think that makes sense. The deductible is a big question, so thank you.
I think we just need to make sure, maybe Ron, you could just tell people, like, I don't know offhand what our deductible is, but let's just make sure that it is less than.
Well, the deductibles vary depending upon, well, I get maybe not because it's mostly insurance is under Maya, so it's probably one deductible. Although sometimes there's different deductibles for different things within the insurance cover, but I think 1,000 would cover all of them. And frankly, I don't think even if it wasn't, 1,000 is a pretty small amount of dollars, even if it was an outside insurance issue. So, I mean, if you're selling something for $1,000, it's really not much of a case. You know, it's not much of anything.
Right. Okay, so as you saw, we pulled much of this in from what used to be called legal affairs. Select board has exclusive power to negotiate and enter into contracts. Of course, they can designate, as they frequently do. So here we get into some changes based on other bylaws.
Hey,
Yep, sure.
One more question here.
Sure.
So the select board may designate an individual or committee to negotiate contracts, but it doesn't allow, like, even if the selectmen, let's assume the town was going to buy a new car for the police department.
Mhm.
That would allow me to negotiate the contract. But if the car was already budgeted in the town's budget, does that still mean that car has to go before the board of selectmen because all contracts have to go before them? So, that just means you're going to have a lot of selectmen's meeting on purchases, because a lot of purchases are considered contracts. Not all of them. Some are just invoices, but things like a car would be considered a contract. So even if it was in the budget, even if you approved the car for 35 grand and it came in, you would have to approve every individual contracts, because it would give me the power to negotiate, but it wouldn't give me the power to approve a contract that was already budgeted for. And I don't care. It just means more things go to board of select, to the select board, whatever.
Well, my answer is this bylaw is for the select board, and it's how we want to operate from here on out as a town. Yeah. So if to negotiate, we could now, if we just add that means any contract could be negotiated and approved.
I guess I think that may go a little bit too far. I would say for purchases within the town budget or something, just to make sure it doesn't go too far. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you want to have the town administrator that do something outside of the budget, for instance, although I don't think the select board would ever give them that power. But I think you want to be clear that the board of selectmen can't give the power to approve contracts that are already budgeted for, which would be, purchases that are already in the budget, I guess is what I'm thinking of. That makes sense, Mitch? I don't want to go too far, but you may want to make it a little bit more lenient.
Actually, so now I'm going to, sorry about that. So now I'm going to split this into two, because there are actually two different ideas. And this other one is the so now we have separate lines, one for negotiation and a second, which can be any contract in the town. You can negotiate on behalf of the select board if they designate you. But the second one lets them designate you for to approve any contract when funds for that contract have already been appropriated by town meeting.
That's what I was that's what I was thinking.
Okay, great.
It's up to the board though. I'm giving you an idea. It's up to the board.
At the end of the day, that's right. So, Skip, what are you thinking about that?
I think it's fine.
Jeff, any comments?
No, it sounds sound to me. It's okay.
Can you tell I'm going to make sure everybody gets involved in the meeting, whether they want to be or not? Okay. So anything else on contracts? All right. So this next section D came from the CIPC bylaw and was actually very weak because it used to say that the town's not allowed to vote on any article unless, on any capital improvement project, unless it's been run by the Capital Improvement Planning Committee. Well, the problem is, and so we got a $100 fine for it. Who gets the fine? And there's no way to know. The entire town, the moderator, because he allowed it to come to a vote? No, because he has to let it come to a vote because it's on the warrant. Instead, I backed it up in the process and said the select board shall place no article on any town meeting warrant accepting citizen petitions, appropriating monies for a capital improvement until the Capital Improvement Planning Committee has considered such improvement. I did not say approved such improvement. I said they considered that improvement.
I think the one exception, Peter, you have to take into consideration is, I believe when you had met with CIPC, there have been some instances of things that have come up over the last couple of years that are emergency capital requests that, because of scheduling or whatever, may not have had time to be vetted by CIPC prior to the joint meetings between the boards. I can foresee that happening again, potentially. You know, if you have older equipment or something breaks right before town meeting, we might have to do something with that. But I don't know if we can make an exception. I think the CIPC bylaw had something about emergency requests in it.
Yes, and it still does. But emergency requests would, even by the old bylaw, the voting, even for an emergency request, unless it's been considered, is a violation of the bylaw.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, when you're done, I have a question.
Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks. I'm wondering if this is trying to say that at least CIPC is made aware that there is going to be a request. So it's not necessarily that CIPC has thoroughly considered it, but it's on CIPC's radar.
No, it says has to be considered.
Right. So they must meet to discuss.
Right.
Okay. So I was just wondering if there was, looking at it from a different perspective, in the instances where it's an emergency, that CIPC is at least aware that this is an issue. But I don't know how the original CIPC bylaw was written. So
I think what, and I think we're kind of saying the same thing. In the emergency clause in the CIPC bylaw, Peter, it sounds like even if it were an emergency, it can't be placed on the warrant unless it is actively considered by CIPC. Consideration meaning that they had met as a board and deliberated on it versus just made aware. And I'm fine with this because I think CIPC is one of those committees that the state recommends, and it protects the town to make sure that all of our capital investments are vetted properly. So I'm fine with this. I just want to make sure that if this is in here, because I know CIPC has been upset with the select board in prior years because things were stuffed through without going through CIPC, that we just have to work maybe as a town having better communications. But I think Harry and Joe or whoever's on the board moving forward will definitely have the discretion to call an emergency meeting if that's necessary. But I just wanted to make sure, Peter, that's what that meant and what our roles and responsibilities were.
I believe that was the intent as it was originally written, and I sort of codified it in a harder way here. by placing a specific requirement on the select board.
Peter,
Yes.
question through the chair. I'm just thinking about the cable fund revolving funds themselves here.
Mhm.
So in your mind, is spending money from the revolving fund, is that appropriating money for a capital improvement because it's not really a budgeted item? I mean, so if we wanted to buy a camera for the public access TV station, I don't think those have gone through the capital improvement committee. But I guess I wonder if that's considered an appropriation or not, because it's not a fund of the taxpayers.
So at one of the meetings I attended, we had that basic discussion, and the CIPC has not objected to the fact that cable being this funded by an external source, it hasn't bothered them that we've behaved in this manner.
Okay.
That
So,
the town has acted as a whole, whether just the committee or however you want to define it, has
Right.
acted this way. It is so. I am of two minds, because the part of me that begs for government transparency wants me to put all those requests before the CIPC. But at the end of the day, the CIPC ends up, that part of the process is entirely optional for cable, because unless they're going to try and change the budget for cable, they can't prevent, because it is a revolving fund based, and the monies are allocated and appropriated at town meeting as a single bucket.
I would agree. I just wanted to make sure it was clarified. I don't think it's appropriation in the normal sense of the word.
Right, it's certainly an appropriation from the general fund.
Yeah. Okay, just want to be clear on that while we're doing this, so
Mhm.
there's no misunderstanding. I just to be clear, I think all capital improvements, at the very least, from cable should come through me. It shouldn't be purchased without at least having the town administrator review it, but I'm not sure it needs
And I think that's fine. I don't think we're
Yep.
just going by the rules that you have established for purchases. Anything that would be considered capital, you have to review. So, and just as part of the town appropriations rules, that's fine.
Okay.
And when we come to you for a $50,000 expenditure later this year, you'll be made aware of it. And yes, we have a whole a suite of processes to follow in that domain.
Just so the Board of Selectmen knows that if I get that kind of request, I will send you guys a note or an email letting you know that I'm getting that kind of request. But this is normally in the case, boards of selectmen or whatever don't normally approve those, but I just wanted to put it out there so you understood what's going on with that.
Mhm.
Because it's significant purchases, but it's all expected purchases. When the cable funds are given to the town, it's expected to be used for only those items that are going to be used by the cable advisory committee. It can't be used for any other purpose. So.
Right. And it can't just be any purpose that the cable advisory committee decides. It has to be related specifically to the PEG television channels.
Yep.
So. Moving on. We explicitly said select board shall refer all articles to town meeting in every town meeting warrant for FinCom. Okay. And if the select board is asked to put, if a town committee, let's make it simple. Let's ignore citizen petitions, which are always special. But if a town committee, or say the DPW director says, I'd like to put this bylaw on the town warrant, send them to the bylaw committee, please. And so it's capital improvement, FinCom, and bylaws are the three explicit town meeting warrant requirements in here. So in G, we are codifying what was done by town meeting vote. Select board shall act as the town's board of public works.
Do we want to talk about that? Anybody?
Sure.
I mean, there's been a lot of grumbling around town about, I can see both sides about having those separate. If there's some way to remove the politics from the Board of Public Works, simply because of the mismanagement of the water sewer enterprise accounts and the fee structure. I know it can be politically unpopular, for example, to raise rates, and they had not been raised in line with, surrounding communities for a period of several years, and it ended up kicking us in the butt. I'm just wondering if the board had any thought on whether or not that should be looked at before we codify that into our bylaws.
So, Leah, what do you think? Should they be separate boards? Or should it be more like it is right now?
I've been thinking this through. I mean, I can argue both sides, and I think, I don't have a definitive answer at this very moment. I mean, like, it's been on the, comes and goes as far as the topic is of conversation, and I can see pros and cons to it both. I also wonder if, having a conversation with our DPW director as to the handling of this, because we as currently rely a lot on recommendations from our DPW superintendent director, that title. And I think that in the past that's gotten us in some trouble also. So,
Skip?
We're just talking about the highway, the public works, right? Are we talking water and sewer both?
Right. So the Board of Public Works is responsible for all the water, all the sewer, all the parks, all the highways. I'm trying to think what other things. There are a list of things that go into it based on Chapter 41, Section 69. Because when the town accepted that section, all of those other departments went away.
I don't have a problem with it, except that I think the water sewer department should be separated from the Board of Selectmen. That's the only one that I think should be separated and have their own.
You actually can't do that by law. It's all of Public Works is with the Select Board. Well, the entirety of Public Works has to be with the same body. So it's not just water sewer. That's MGL and because of, well, again, if the town has made two town meeting votes, the first one to create the Board of Public Works, or the first one actually the Board of Public Works per 4169D. The second one was to name the Select Board, and this is done some number of years later, to name the Select Board as the Board of Public Works.
Peter, I think that those were actually ballot questions in the 70s.
That could very well be. I'd have to go back to see what we wrote and when.
So basically, Peter, it's all or nothing for the Public Works is what you're responding to Skip.
That's right. So in order to split those up, we would need to undo at least one town meeting vote, rescind one vote, which could get rid of the Board of Public Works and reinstate water and sewer and all the different departments. And then we need to write the bylaws to say who's got authority for what.
Leah, I see her.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering also what the financial implications are for doing it both ways. If we separate out a Board of Public Works, is that at least initially a bigger investment, or I have no idea. I don't know if FinCom has any info on that. I'm just trying to think. If it was done in the 70s, I don't imagine that it was necessarily strictly budgetary. But as the town's grown and the needs of everything that falls under the public works umbrella has increased, I don't think that the select board necessarily does it justice. And I'm also worried that the town can fund it to do it justice as it should.
What do we
As
mean by
separate.
funding? What are we funding?
I don't know. I don't know what all, I need to do more research to understand what all falls under the Board of Public Works. It's not simply water and sewer, from the sounds of it. And so are we able, is there an expense to that? Is there a budget item for that I don't know. That's, I guess, my question.
There shouldn't be, because that's the budget stuff is already present by having the director. There is, I don't recall, I don't think there is any pay associated with the Board of Public Works.
Right.
So I don't think there are any budgetary implications. It is an organizational, and what it would create. So I'm going to take a wild guess, having not lived here in the 70s, having not lived in Rutland in the 70s. I'm going to guess that the town was having trouble finding people who were willing to run for the Board of Public Works, because guess what? That's an elected body.
Yeah, so I'm looking at MGL right now, 4169D, which is your Board of Public Works. And just Leah, I know you asked about what it encompasses, and it indicates road, highways, streets, water, sewer, municipal light, which we don't have, commissioners, park commissioners, cemetery, tree warden authority, moth superintendent, don't think we have one of those, forestry, and any other related boards. So, I mean, that's kind of the scope, I think, of what we usually just deal with, the water sewer portion of it, because those are the requests that come in. And I think we've had, since I've been on the board, maybe 1 or 2 tree hearings with the tree warden, which is also, I think, Joe Buckley by default.
Yes.
Yeah. So it would encompass those specific areas, I guess, according to MGL. But I don't think that there would be any financial, I mean, other than the legal review cost and whatever Peter is charging us for his time. That was a joke.
Yes, I was going to say it's obscene, whatever.
Right. I don't think it would be, it doesn't appear that there would be a cost associated with that at all, if we wanted to move in that direction.
That's
but
right.
I know it's been an issue that's come up when every one of us has run, people ask about it. So if we're going to codify it, I figure we might as well have the discussion. Maybe this is something where I don't want us to get hung up tonight. Maybe we put it on the agenda for the select board and we have that conversation in a future select board meeting, if that's something the board wants to do.
I would feel more comfortable with that, because I think having it as an elected board, that doesn't necessarily depoliticize it. I mean, it takes it out of the select board's politicization, but it does not by any means depoliticize it. So I definitely personally don't feel like I have a good enough grasp on the MGL period to make a definitive decision tonight, but I totally respect the perspective of both sides.
There is one other thing to note, hidden deep somewhere else in maybe 69C, is that the Board of Public Works is a 3-person body. Now we get around that because we, the town, assigned the select board as the Board of Public Works. So we actually have a 5-person board. But I believe that if we were to take it away from, well, maybe. My first gut reaction is that if we take it away from the select board, we go back to being a 3-person board.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to guess whether that improves or hinders the removal of some level of politics from it.
So, a few comments, if I could, Mr. Chairman. So, a couple of things I think that this will do. I think one, it will slow down work getting done, because all things like trying to get engineers for road work or different things would now have to go through this board. There's a standard procurement process where you'd have to write up RFPs and all that. And they eventually come to the Board of Selectmen for approval. I guess they would, instead of going to Board of Selectmen, they would go to this Public Works Board. So I just think it would temporarily slow down the process a little bit. I guess, Peter, I'm trying to understand who sets the water and sewer rates under a board. Is it still the selectmen, or does
It
this
is
board
the-
actually set
It is the Board of Public Works.
Yeah.
So
then-
the selectmen acting as Board of Public Works set all the rates.
So I would say this, the good thing about setting the rates and the reason why it's good to have the select board do it is that they tend to be sensitive to taxpayers when they set the rates, and they're a little bit more cautious. Having a public works board, they may not have the same sensitivity when setting rates that a board of selectmen might have. I just personally, I just think it's more bureaucracy. I'm not convinced it will really add much to the process, but that's just my thoughts.
Understood. Well, it is gonna, I guarantee you this is something that's gonna come up when we get to town meeting, because
Right.
it comes up every year. So I just wanna make sure we at least have the space to have the discussion.
Hey, Mitch, I guess or maybe the question is better, Pete. Is how's it trending? I mean, do most towns go to the board of selectmen, or do a lot of towns have these public works boards? In the towns I mentioned, I've never had a public works board, but how's it going? Which way?
I have not surveyed the towns. I've looked around at a few pointed ones, and I've seen separate public works boards, but not universally.
And I think a lot of the ones locally are separate public works because they have municipal light, and we're
Right.
kind of
Right.
one of the standouts, at least very locally, regionally, that does not have municipal light. So that takes that piece out. I don't know if that's the reason that they have the separate board or not, but
It's not an easy, I don't think there's an easy answer to what will help politically. Just
No,
because.
it's not about helping politically. It's more about, you know, I think politics plays a token in everything, but it's about perhaps getting folks that are more qualified. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess the discussion again was because the Board of Selectmen mishandled the water sewer so poorly that I think there was a lot of folks in town that were outraged by that. And I get that, and maybe it's just a matter of making sure that we're all consistent with regularly holding those meetings, and when things need to be done, we do them. But you know what, we'll put it on a future board agenda. We don't have to rehash all this tonight. We can talk about it at our board prior to town meeting. And
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to specifically point out this section was removed, annual appoint inspector of gas piping and gas appliances. Many of the appointment powers, so we generally, the bylaw committee generally took all the appointment powers, and those things that are required to be appointed by the select board are still appointed by the select board, but anyone who's not statutorily required to be appointed by the select board is now appointed by the town administrator, as you'll see in his bylaw when we get to that next. Things that disappeared. So now we have to find the things that stick around. Oh, there we go. You can appoint a town administrator. You appoint town council, a town accountant, fire chief, a treasurer collector, town's veteran agent, constables, and you appoint all members to non-elected committees. So that, in general, these are your appointment powers, which, as I understand it, is pretty much the way it's been since we've had a town administrator who's been taking over the appointment powers overall. So these, I mean, you can see the GL sections that specifically call out who's got it, and the select board has expressed its desires to keep appointing volunteer committees. Fine. And finally, acting or interim town officials when necessary. Hey, look, you have the ability to remove someone, any employee or consultant that you appointed.
What is just cause?
Well, that's an interesting question. That Lynn, would you care to speak up about what just cause is?
Who are you asking?
Lynn Turcott.
I don't know if it has a definition, but it somebody wore a tie you didn't like, that wouldn't be just cause. They'd have to have a good reason for it.
It's normally considered criminal acts is normally in the just cause provision. In major contracts, it's specifically spelled out. And then there is
Well, we have contracts with our, it's different with you, Rob, because it's all spelled out in your contract. And I'm just curious as to, that's kind of vague. And I was curious as to what the definition of just cause would be.
I think I thought I sent you a copy of what just cause means generally in like labor law, but it's kind of a general term that's kind of above minor items. It's supposed to be designed for larger issues, but they don't really specifically define all the issues. I don't think they know what they are. So, obviously you wouldn't suspend somebody for missing one meeting, but let's assume, and we'll talk about boards or powers. If somebody missed 6 meetings, I think you'd have just cause. It's a level of reasonableness, I think, is kind of the way they define it. What's reasonable? Well, I guess people can argue about what that is, but usually it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, that's kind of the way it is. But I don't think there's any specific just cause for every different kind of situation. It's something that's, above minor issues that is reasonable to take a more significant action. And I think a court would have to determine if you went, if you didn't have just cause and you seem to get rid of somebody for minor reason, I think a court could force you to put people back if they challenged it, I think,
Got
I
it.
think also it's Leah. I think also it needs to be documented. Like it can't just be on the whim. There has to be, if it's an ongoing issue, ongoing documentation. If it's something severe enough that it's not an ongoing, there still needs to be documentation of findings and everything. I think.
Actually, no, that's not really accurate.
No?
It rises to the level of the issue. So let me give you an example. If a truck driver at DPW is driving a plow truck, it was under the influence of drugs, it was the first time, just cause can be a one-time act. You don't have to build it up. What I think you're more referring to is you have to
Patterns of behavior.
continuous efforts to show increased penalties of smaller, larger events. But just cause can be a one-time event, clearly.
Right. No. But I think also you need to have documentation that this was a severe enough act and that there was the X, Y, and Z was found to be operating under the influence or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's different depending. What Ron's saying is different upon the situation. I'm not sure, Leah, where you're seeing that, because that's why I'm asking for clarification. What is not even just employees, but appointed boards.
I think she's talking about what's called progressive discipline.
Right, but that's a contractual employee issue.
Yeah, we're
talking about appointments and different things like that.
Yeah, you can't just fire somebody for doing something wrong the first time.
Right.
You have to first give a letter of written order. Sometimes you suspend, and then eventually you can terminate. That's a process that's pretty much recognized as progressive discipline in any contract. But that's a little bit different than just cause. Just cause could be the nature of the event more than how many times it is. How many times it is. It's the size of the event, so to speak.
And it doesn't have to be criminal. You could have a severe conflict of interest or something like that.
It could be a committee member who doesn't show up for 6 meetings. That's not a criminal thing, but it's a reasonable reason to get rid of somebody from a committee or something. So it doesn't have to be criminal.
So it's interesting that you brought that up, Ron. You and I had a fast discussion earlier today about this. Every appointed committee member is a town employee from conflict of interest law definition. So this section explicitly gives the select board the authority to remove a board member for just cause. And it's, Ron says, that could easily be missing some quantum of meetings. That's specifically called out in the FinCom bylaws.
It's 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yes. But if you have the authority to appoint, you have the authority to remove.
It should be consistent across all boards, though.
Yes.
So whatever, I mean, FinCom is the standard you guys want to use. That's what me and Pete were talking about today. I suggested that it be consistent across all boards of commission, at least for things like absences, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If somebody misses 6 meetings in a row, that the board of selectmen would have a right to remove them. Some standard, so to speak.
Right.
Sorry, this is getting down in the weeds. Sorry, FinCom's appointed by the moderator. Would the select board still have the authority to unappoint them, or would that
Nope.
have to go through the moderator?
That's a funny question, and I don't know how to answer it because we don't have a town moderator bylaw. So removal power is, I don't remember seeing removal power anywhere in the town moderators laws, the MGL sections that deal with it. So I honestly don't know that anyone has the power to remove from FinCom.
Somebody's got to have power. Maybe
Yeah, I think we're getting in the weeds, but I mean, like FinCom was used as an example because it is spelled out, I think, in their language. But I mean,
Right.
I think the point was being made that, you know, we should probably set a standard for if you miss 6 consecutive meetings on your board, you know, the Board of Selectmen is going to want to take a look at that potentially, because it's not doing a service to the town if you're not contributing. When you have people that might want to contribute.
So we'll talk about that when we get to the bylaw about committees. We have a lot of rules that have gone in there that I think will, and we can add what constitutes just cause for removal to that bylaw pretty easily. Well, let me say that differently. We can come up with some nice rules that are very clear and then have a really awful or other elements because you can't cover all possibilities in a bylaw.
Oh no, the stuff that comes up, you can't make it up. So
So anything else on suspension and removal?
no, sir.
So this comes out of a previous bylaw. Select board shall be the tax title custodian. Okay. I don't know why that's not the treasurer collector, but it's not. And you folks get to reorganize anytime you want. Departments, offices, etc.
I'm sorry. Pete, I just need to understand that. The select board shall be the tax title custodian for the purpose of GL. So I thought under state law, treasurers handle all the tax title stuff. For instance, recently she just did a sale on properties that were under tax title. I thought, I'm pretty clear, she didn't have to go to the Board of Selectmen because under tax title law, that gives exclusive right to the treasurer. So is that in conflict with this? See?
I honestly don't know.
I think it is. I think it's in conflict with state law. You need to look.
Well, let's.
Because in Southbridge, that was clearly the treasurer who had that power under state law. And Rebecca just did it recently, and my understanding was she had the power as well. So I'm not sure what it means that the select board is the.
Yeah. That was the original. That's been in the bylaws for a long time.
Yeah.
Here it is. The mayor of any city or the selectman in any town which holds property acquired by foreclosure of tax titles or acquired blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
So maybe the
may appoint a custodian. This is what gives you the authority to tell the treasurer collector that she can go off and do it.
Yeah, and we actually, that's a good point, Peter, because if our board remembers when Becky went to auction those properties off, we had the ability to remove properties that we didn't want going to auction. So I think that there's somewhere in MGL that I read about the disbursement of real property under the way our form of government's organized that would give the selectmen the authority to do that. But I mean, that would explain why we met with Becky and had to approve that auction before it moved forward. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Did you do that? I don't remember you guys doing that, but okay.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
I did remember there were meetings between Becky and the select board about this.
Yeah, and we had a hearing on it, I think. There were folks interested in a few of the individual parcels, and so we had the opportunity.
That's right.
Yep.
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else on powers of the select board? So this whole section down here says the town administrator has the right to participate in any select board meeting at all, and he can be a full participant. I'm not going to mention Robert's Rules of Order and going through the chair and all of that, but that's really all this says. And
Before we go into executive session, oh, that's just concerning the town administrator's contract.
Right, that's the only one that you folks have to explicitly approve him to go into it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, good.
And we have a whole thing about how you remove the town administrator should you decide you want and need to.
Personally, I think we should delete this whole section, you know? Just kidding, just kidding.
There we go. I'm not going to go through everything about it. You just have to follow rules. Okay. And my goodness, it has a lot more words than I like, but there's still all the things that have to go into it. And that's the end of the select board bylaw.
I'm good. Does anyone have any questions or comments from our
Questions?
board?
Yep,
Jeff,
anything?
Skip? All right, looks like we're all right.
All right, and we'll do that save because we put in $1,000. And now let's pull up the brand new bylaw, which is all about our town administrator.
Great. We've needed something like this for a long time.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the truth. We took several bylaws that Mike Nicholson gave us, and we sort of combined them and took what we think are the best parts out of them. And this is what we came up with.
So we Frankensteined it. Sounds
You
good.
betcha. And so we have Article of the Constitution. This is how he gets appointed. And you'll get to serve on it. You're one of the few town officials, Ron, who doesn't get to serve on other boards unless you're ex officio.
Good. Hey, I'm just curious about one thing. In most other things I've said, the Board of Selectmen is the chief executive officer of the town.
Yes.
Normally, Peter, it says that the town administrator is the chief administrative officer.
Yes.
Not in the state of our terms, but I don't see that here. Should that be here? I don't know what it really means either, but it defines the difference. That's how you kind of define the difference.
That's that's interesting. Well, you're right. We don't say that, do we?
Yeah, I don't see it.
Because there's human resources,
Yeah.
chief financial, chief procurement, chief information.
The big one is chief administrative officer. It's not here. I'm not.
Oh, I wonder how that escaped, because we had it, I thought, for a time, or originally, but that's okay. I will add a note to add.
Yeah, that's most times that's the distinction between the two positions.
Right.
You know.
And in fact, I think that these other duties that we list are all part of being chief administrative officer. I think it's pretty easy to move in from there.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we laid out a great many responsibilities for human resources and all the appointment powers. In fact, you'll notice, shall be the appointing authority for all department heads, officers, subordinates, and employees of the town, except for employees of elected officials, employees appointed by select board, and employees appointed by the town moderator. And the only reason I have this one in here explicitly is that GL Chapter 143, Section 30 says you need to have an explicit appointing authority spelled out. So we moved it from select board to town administrator. And it doesn't matter that he actually reports to whatever position that is, who's underneath the town administrator's department head.
Hey, Peter, one thing I'm just a little bit curious about.
Yes.
In a lot of other towns, they define the town accountant role, but here it says nothing about the town accountant, and it just makes me the chief financial officer of the town.
The town accountant is covered in the town accountant bylaw, which is in section 3, chapter 3, which is all the financial matters.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, just to clarify, Peter, you had already talked about this. The town administrator shall be the appointing authority for all department heads, officers, subordinates, and employees of the town. Which, the way it reads right now, the only person that would not be appointed by Ron would be the fire chief, other than your elected officials and the moderator.
The treasurer,
I believe that's correct, and I believe that was practice under Mike Nicholson. So that he appointed the police chief.
you're actually right, Mitch.
So we wouldn't, does that preclude us, let's say our police chief left and we were hiring a new police chief, would that interview process strictly fall under the purview simply of the town administrator without board involvement? Or would that be something where the board would have authority to be involved with that hiring process?
Well, I think this is one of those cases where the board would have the authority to direct the town administrator on how to perform the search and what the interview process should be. Because you do have, you as select board, here we get the great catch-all at first. The town administrator shall be responsible to the select board for administration of all town affairs. That's a very, very broad brush.
All right. Just clarifying.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll say this, Mitch, and I think you're right. Generally, with the way that most police officers are hired today, in today's world, is you actually hire a company to come in, and they do a whole review process for both internal and external candidates, and they go through it, and they give you a top 3 to select from. That's the normal process, and there's a variety of companies that do that. But you are correct. In some towns, a police chief usually it says that the town administrator recommends and then you ratify. It's generally what could happen in those situations.
Got it.
It's a ratification process for a couple of those positions. So if you wanted to have it, you could put the town administrator shall appoint, and it needs with the approval of the Board of Selectmen. So if you voted to approve it, would go through, but you can't, the Board of Selectmen could not come in and pick the second candidate. You'd just be able to say yes or no to who I selected. That would be the way it usually works. So it's a kind of ratification process.
Okay.
There's actually a problem, and I just recognized it. When I read this, I think that the town administrator would appoint the DPW superintendent. But I know that's not true, but that's not the select board, so we need to go in and touch up this.
Like I said, I think the board should look at what positions it wants to ratify. You know what I mean? You want to ratify the DPW position, you want to ratify the police chief. Often there's some key officials that boards of selectmen, they kind of give their blessing to. And if there's obviously a problem, then they could vote that candidate down. But I would not have a problem with police chief, DPW directors being two of the positions that I had to bring to the board of selectmen for ratification. That's pretty common.
So we'd want to, department heads maybe? Would it be,
It's only
it wouldn't go, what's that?
only key department heads. It's usually not all department heads. Police chief, fire chief are the two big ones. DPW, sometimes I've seen it.
I'm personally fine with the way Peter wrote it originally,
Okay.
simply because if you have a competent town administrator, I think sometimes it takes the politics out of it in the sense where it makes appointments less messy. So I'm fine with it.
Okay, so we need to add something about other statutory requirements where the Board of Public Works is the appointing authority for DPW superintendent. So I need to write some words there about that. Okay. Excuse me.
Let me raise my concern to that comment, Peter.
Okay.
But what I really do hate, if you had a board that appointed a DPW director, what I hate about those kind of situations, it leads staff members who have problems, like a DPW, or if my DPW director wasn't responding to me, I couldn't do anything without going to the board to get them to discipline, and it makes it very difficult to discipline bad department heads when they have this other board that they can kind of go to and suck up to and get around it. And I can think of a perfect example. I won't say it publicly, but
well, I understand. The problem is that Mass General Law is very clear that the Board of Public Works hires the superintendent.
Okay, so if you go to Public Works, that's another issue with the Public Works Board, then.
Right.
Okay.
So again, and that could also talk about a reason to not involve another board, is that would be a different board that isn't the select board you'd have to deal with the superintendent. I mean, it's as a practical matter.
Yep. It does cause real issues as to who runs the town in those situations.
I understand. I just don't know how to do it in a way that doesn't conflict with Mass General Law.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, everyone wants their own little fiefdoms, so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have the same clause that we had in select board. If the town administrator can appoint, the town administrator can suspend or remove. And by the way, the town administrator may cause to be examined without notice the job-related affairs or conduct of any town department, officer, or employee, regardless of the manner of selection of that department, officer, or employee. So, town administrator actually has that's another nice broad stroke that we're sort of assigning there. So let's see, there's all the stuff about CFO. Town administrator creates the town's annual and operating and capital budgets. Consult with finance and capital improvement planning committee, of course. Shall recommend compensation for all town officers. This is all kind of stuff that we've taken from other places. And the town administrator shall periodically review the town's expenditures for conformance with the budget there. Okay.
I think that FinCom is going to have a problem with the language of D.
That would not surprise me.
For which one?
D.
The one that aims you. Oh, actually, D1.
D1.
Look,
January. The town administrator is doing that right now.
Exactly.
When we created, that's not the issue. They're the ones who get to recommend it to town meeting. But they don't
Right,
create.
but part of the creating, I think that they would argue that falls under their purview is going to be taking what you put forward, Ron, and then molding and shaping it.
Yeah, that's not creating it. They can't. They have the power to recommend less money in different things in different places, but they don't have the. They really, I don't think they really have the power to so to speak change it.
That's
'Cause they're
exactly
advisory
correct.
by law. So
Well, exactly what I was going to say, Ron. They are an advisory committee. They do not have authority to do anything but review and to recommend,
right.
favorably or unfavorably. That is the limit of their powers.
That's why when you see a warrant at town meeting, you'll see, the town administrator recommended budget, and then you'll see the FinCom recommended budget. And in theory, it's a recommendation. I mean, I could get up and argue for my original budget. It's just that they've made an opinion against my recommendation.
And on top of that, the select board at the end of the day decides what goes on the warrant.
Correct.
So we have so many layers of checks and cross checks, and when things don't agree, it's difficult, but I think it's supposed to be difficult if people don't agree.
Yeah, I've seen select board members get up or oppose the finance recommendations and win at town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good that they recommend it and they're supposed to have be a responsible fiscal overlook of the budget, but it's not all powerful. If the select board wanted to get up and oppose them, they could. You try not to because it's really bad at town meeting if you have that kind of a fight. But
yes,
but it happens all the time where selectmen say no, I don't agree with the FinCom, and this is what we want. So
Understood. Just I think
yes, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for that call. So we've been through financial officer, chief procurement officer, chief information officer, and the main point of contact for media. Oh, and for intergovernmental affairs. And shall supervise the administration of all appointed departments and committees. And you get to look at anything just like FinCom does and just like the accountant does. And you get to show up and be an active participant everywhere you go. Including discussions in executive session, yes.
Wait a minute. The town administrator may be an active participant in any discussion during a meeting of an appointed committee, including discussions in executive session.
Mm-hmm.
This power, referring to the aforementioned power of being an active participant
yes.
of an appointed committee, may not be designated to another individual or committee. Does that mean we are doing away with board liaisons?
No, I don't think it does.
Because the board will appoint liaisons to go to other boards on behalf of the Board of Selectmen or on behalf of the town, because the Board of Selectmen, for all intents and purposes, is representative of the town.
Mm-hmm.
That could be construed as delegating that authority to a member of the Board of Selectmen.
I don't think so. I think the difference is what we're saying is that the town administrator basically must be acknowledged by the chair, but a liaison from the select board need not be. I think it's a different set of powers, or a different authority, if you will.
I don't see the distinction.
well, I disagree with you, Peter. I think in this case, the committee could invite anyone it wants to an executive session as long as they were relevant to the discussion that was in executive session. So they can invite a lawyer, they can invite an individual if they're part of what the executive session is about. And what it's saying is that I can go into all the executive sessions, but I don't think this gives the power to selectmen to go in without a committee invitation.
No, I agree. The select board would still need an invitation to go to executive.
It's Leah, if I may.
Yes.
I read it as this power, meaning the power to be able to go into executive session, was that could not be designated to another individual or committee. I didn't, and then when Mitch raised the point as far as the liaisons, I can see how it reads to be that the entirety of that whole sentence and not just that sub part. So I think maybe it's two separate things. I'm not sure.
No, the intent was the entire sentence.
Right.
So he's maybe an active participant in any discussion of any appointed committee, including executive session. All of that is the power that may not be designated. So what we're saying here is the town administrator doesn't get to send someone on his behalf to beat up any committee in any session. If he wants to do that, he's got to do it.
But then I don't read it then as it precluding select board members attending as liaisons either. I mean, I think it's two separate issues then.
I agree. There is nothing anywhere about select board liaisons. The requirement to have them, the requirement not to have them, and what powers they have. So they would be, as far as the committee is concerned, any member of the public.
Hey, Peter, just so I'm clear on this, because I want to make sure. I'm on vacation. I designate the treasurer collector to be the town administrator in my absence. That person, I'm not designating to go to a executive session or meeting.
Mm-hmm.
They're acting town administrator. So that person could go into an executive session of some committee in my absence because they're effectively the town administrator, right?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay.
So it's, I guess what I would say is it's not a separable power from the person acting as town administrator.
I think the committee would generally invite people that had an active role in the discussion because those people can be invited in. So if a selectman was there as a liaison and there was a legitimate reason for them to be part of the executive session, the chairperson could invite that person into the executive session.
Yes, and I would like to think that K were not necessary, but I don't believe it.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, I'm not talking about executive session. That's got its own different set of rules. I was just more grammatically. I was just concerned about the perhaps misconstruement of this particular sentence. But it sounds like we've worked that out. As long as we're all clear what the intent is, I think that we'll be okay.
Okay. Moving on, unless there's another comment or question.
Yeah, just Mr. Chairman, are there concurrently liaisons from the Board of Selectmen for any committees? Because I wasn't aware of that. Is there?
No.
Okay.
We did used to delegate. Each board member would be a liaison to a different board or committee that were meeting. It became an ineffective system and a lot of meetings for a lot of different people. So we've moved away from that and just tried to improve communication with different board chairs in its place. I think that the last time we revisited it might have been a little over a year and a half ago, and it seemed like the liaison method wasn't entirely working.
Each selectman generally become a cheerleader for that organization. So that's what generally happens in those situations. So all of a sudden, the liaison for DPW is in support of everything that DPW does. That's what usually happens.
Yeah. Well, there were so many committees that each select board member was a liaison to a number of committees to make that function.
Yeah, we have a lot of committees.
Yep. Okay.
All right, moving on. Town administrator shall coordinate the administration of grants. Notice that we didn't say the town administrator shall administrate all grants. You just coordinate the administration. You do what, so that other people can be involved also, because we know how big grants are, and there are other people other department heads who are very good at grants, and you sort of let them do their thing. Yeah, so he can close the town offices. You can direct the town to be flown, the flag of the town to be flown at half staff. And you can, unless otherwise prohibited, designate in writing an individual to, or committee to carry on any duty or responsibility. Is that really it? Yes, that's really it.
Great job, Peter.
Really is. Good.
Kudos to the entire committee. We've worked very hard on all of these. And obviously we have a little more work to do on some of them, but overall, we're pretty close to ready to move forward on several chapters. So we saw that we went through 1, 2, 3, 4 bylaws in the fine table this evening. The next chapter, which is financial affairs, it's an important one, obviously. 1, 2, 3, financial and legal, excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I could have looked at that. There are 7 bylaws in that one, so that's probably a good one to have just that chapter by itself.
Yeah.
I don't know when you would, when the select board would like to do next, because there's a lot more happening in town right now. We're rapidly approaching town meeting, and I don't want to block a Monday you might use for that.
Here's my and Anita, you and I had a discussion about this after special, about how, particularly from your standpoint as clerk, because you do a lot of work and prep for the meetings, there's a lot of setup, and there is an expense that's required. It sounds like if we're presenting this to the public for ratification or adoption, this could be a lengthy discussion, a lengthy meeting, even with your 5-minute limit, Peter. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. How, Anita, would you like to see that process unfold? Is it a series of meetings? Is it a separate meeting entirely dedicated to this? What do you think the best approach that we should take as a select board is in working with you on it?
Well, I used to firmly believe that any bylaw changes should be at an annual town meeting, but I'm just afraid that this is way too big a body of work to just try to squeeze it in after we've gone through, the budget process. So to me, it makes sense if we really educate the public that it's either going to be at an adjourned annual town meeting, or to spread it out over a couple of nights.
I think, realistically, how often are we going to be, this is kind of a once in a long time overhaul. So does this justify having its own space or its own meeting that we can then advertise to the public to go through all this stuff? Or do we have the ability to do that?
I think we do. And we've talked about this in the bylaw committee too.
There is an expense associated with it, but it is a once in a really probably several decade.
And it's more just, one, securing the school, which that's a minor expense. And then it's just basically like my staff to check people in. But I think that people would be more comfortable if somehow we could tie it into an annual town meeting, but say that it's going to be, but I don't think people would go to an adjourned meeting, within a week or something. But I don't think that as many people would be critical of us having this at a special as they would be for zoning bylaws, because zoning bylaws are what really get people more concerned. So
does anyone else have any thoughts from our board or from Peter's board? Peter, in the discussions that you had, do you all have any preference?
I don't know that we've taken a formal vote. I think in general, we've agreed that annual town meetings not a great place to do this. I think it becomes an interesting question about how we time it out in terms of getting. Look, special town meetings on weeknights are not well attended, and we know it. So I don't know how well a town meeting focusing on bylaws would be attended on a Saturday night as opposed to on another night. But it does. If I listen to the town and how they objected to moving town meeting away from a Saturday night, they are more interested in Saturday night town meetings than they are on during the week. This also goes to the expense of holding a school.
Well, yeah, it's a good date night, you know, dress up fancy, go out for something to eat, and then you vote to change the bylaws.
There you go.
It's fun
Exactly.
for the whole family. But so what about the process then of, because we're going to have the electronic sign uptown by then, where we can help get the information out that we're going to be discussing the bylaws. Do you think this whole thing is going to be completed by special in the fall? All of the needed changes and review?
All of them plus legal review, sure. Well, actually, let's say that differently. So there's all of our changes that we're going to make, and we do have to put them for legal review. And we also intended to have public meetings, public information sessions, if you will, just about what we're changing.
Yep.
Because this is a substantive set of changes necessarily. I mean, that's the problem with nobody touching it for 70 years. So could we do all of those things by fall? It sure doesn't feel like it offhand.
I also worry that fall town meeting, we usually have other business that we're trying to do also. So I feel like annual and special in the fall, we always have other business, and I worry that then everything gets either rushed through or bogged down or something. I don't have a solution, but I'm just trying to think if there's enough public outreach and there's a way to kind of advertise it as a bylaw, you know, like a once in a lifetime bylaw updating special town meeting or something, that's the way to go. I'm not sure.
I like that from a marketing standpoint, Leah. Like we could hand out little tickets at the door, and you could tell your grandkids you were at the once in a lifetime bylaw where the town was changed. But no, I think maybe having a separate. I guess it's special this year because we tried to keep it light purposefully. It only lasted about an hour. It was one of the quickest meetings we've ever had. But yeah, if it warrants something totally separate, I mean, what do you think about time frame then, Peter? Like, what is your goal? When should we be trying to set this for?
Well, that's a question I don't really have an answer for. We had wanted to be done for this annual, and that's clearly not happening.
Okay, so would it be possible then, because we don't want to beat a dead horse when we don't have everything firmed up, but would it be possible for your group and Anita, maybe use you as town clerk, provide us with recommendations as to what you want to see in this process, and we can work towards that with an understanding as to a preferred method of how to move it forward and what kind of meeting structure we want, and an estimated time frame when that gets closer?
Absolutely, we can work on that.
Is everyone okay with that from our board?
I am. I think that makes the most sense. Thanks everyone for all the hard work on it too.
And then Leah will add in that marketing component. It'll be a lot of fun.
With the electronic signboard too.
That's right.
It's going to be easy with an electronic sign.
Yeah. Okay, so is that it for tonight? Obviously, I want to thank both boards for attending, but you know, Peter, your board, everybody, Lynn, Norm, you know, Anita, for all the hard work that's gone into this, and we certainly appreciate it.
On a side note, that electronic sign is supposed to be ready in a couple of weeks, so.
That's great.
Great.
Excellent. Okay, so I think one of us, if there's nothing else, Peter, I'll entertain a motion for our board to adjourn.
I can make a motion to adjourn.
All right, we have Stillings first and Whitman second the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll have a roll call vote. Clark?
Aye.
Stillings?
Aye.
Whitman,
Whitman, aye.
and Resity, aye. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you all and have a good evening. And Peter, thank you again. Anita, thank you.
Good job, Pete.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank you all.
I will certainly accept a motion from the bylaw committee for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Roll call, Carlson,
aye.
Turcott,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Crane, aye, and Ron has left us, so we are adjourned. Thank you all so very much.